Welcome to JonGetsGames. This is my variety vlog for the month of November 2016, and as you can see, I'll be covering quite a few things. However, unlike most months, I will not be doing an excited about section, mostly because I have just covered the 25 games that I played at BGG.con in this month, and you can watch that video by just clicking the link up in the top right corner. And I am going to be covering some other games played in this variety vlog. These are just the ones that I played not at that convention, so like always, feel free to jump ahead or stick around for the whole thing. As always, we'll begin the general update with a super brief Patreon update. It was a good month. 10 new pledges were added to the campaign, which is really great. I've now broken over $200 a month, which is excellent. It really does help with purchasing the games that I'm getting, and you'll see near the end of the video that, man, I bought a lot of games over this last month. And yeah, I'm super excited for how this campaign continues to roll. So let's go to the next part, which has to do with the amount of videos that I've been putting out recently, and it has definitely slowed down. I'm not sure if you have noticed that, and the big reason for that is, well, I took a 2-week vacation in November where 1 week was at BGG.con and another week was at Tropical Paradise in Mexico for our honeymoon version 2, this time without any hurricanes. And it was a really wonderful time, but I came back from that into holiday hell at my work. So I'm just working like crazy, trying to squeeze out videos where I can, but it's very likely that I will continue to only get about 1 video a week out for the next couple weeks, but come January, hopefully that'll ramp up again. You may also have noticed that I've been putting out less reviews lately, and that is mostly because I've been frantically trying to play as many new games as possible, which means I'm not really digging deep and playing the same game over and over again to get myself to a position where I feel like I can adequately review it. I will say that I'm planning on reviewing Great Western Trail pretty soon, hopefully in the next week or two, because I've got 4 games under my belt and quite a few things to say about that one. So yeah, the number of videos coming out, it's a little bit lower than my goal, which is 2 videos a week, but I know that I can't always hit that. And you know what? Sometimes I just have no videos in a week at all because life gets in the way. Now I want to talk a little bit more about BoardGameGeek.con. This was a wonderful time. It was the 3rd year in a row that I've gone to this convention, and as of yet, it's pretty much the only board game convention that I've gone to. I'm hoping to change that next year. I'm really going to try to get to Gen Con. I'm going to try to get to Essen and maybe even the UK Games Expo. Those are going to be expensive, but that is part of the reason why I have a Patreon that helps fund the games I buy, but it also helps me get out to these conventions, which means I can make better connections with people and get access to better games. It's just a very good cycle. And anyway, I had a great time at BoardGameGeek.con this year. About 13 of my friends flew out to Dallas from the Bay Area, so I had this core, huge group of people that I know and love already and love to play games with, but I also made it a goal of myself going out to this convention to meet new people and to play games with people I didn't already know, specifically in real life, and I did a pretty good job of that. I think I formally introduced myself to at least 10 people that I know previously just through Twitter or through YouTube channels, but I will say that probably like 30 people came up to me who I didn't necessarily know already, who were just fans of the channel and mentioned that they really like the stuff I do, and that's great. I asked people to do that, but I will admit that I felt pretty awkward with those interactions. I don't think I pulled them off terribly well. And it was not the people coming up to me. It was definitely me just, you know, kind of being not really sure what to say when just somebody out of the blue came up and said, "Hey, I really like your stuff." It's like, that's great. It makes me feel good, but it's like, awesome. How are you liking the convention? You know, I tried to like broach into a conversation which I wanted to have. I just felt kind of weird about, if I'm being honest. And I think a big part of the reason why so many people seem to come up to me way more than last year is because this year at the convention, the channel had about 7,000 subscribers, and last year the channel had 1,500, which shows you an incredible growth over the last year. That's, you know, over about 4 times as many people. Is that true? Yeah, a little over 4 times as many people, I can't do math on camera, are subscribing to the channel. So just a lot more interactions with people. It was a really great convention, and I'm looking forward to BoardGameGeek.con 2017, as well as potentially a whole bunch of other conventions next year. And lastly, I want to talk about the first ever board game flea market that happened at Victory Point Cafe in Berkeley. Technically, this happened on December 3rd, so I probably should talk about it next month, but whatever, I want to discuss it right now. And I will admit, I feel a little bit weird about admitting this, but I want to be as public and open as possible about my process with the board games that I buy and also the games that I get for review copies in order to cover on the channel. I sold, I think, 30 to 35 games at the flea market, which was great. It gave me a whole bunch of money, which I immediately put into a specific checking account that I have that's dedicated towards John Gets Games, because I want these game sales to go towards purchasing new games and purchasing new equipment and just keeping things rolling for the channel. I'm not just selling these things to pay rent or buy fancy food at restaurants or something like that. But it is a little bit interesting from an ethical perspective, selling games that I got for free. And I think in general, I am okay with this because, well, first of all, I only have so much shelf space, so I have to remove things as I get new things, and I really enjoy getting new games. I do it all the time, and again, you'll see at the end of the video, I acquired a lot of games over this last month. But the flip side is I could potentially just give these games away instead of getting them for money, because I was given them for free. But I really think that it's good to invest in this channel, invest in getting more money to buy new games, to buy new equipment, as I just mentioned. And I feel like when I am sent to review copies of games, I am kind of solving the contract that I sort of have with the company by making videos and covering the games, perhaps just in a variety vlog, or perhaps putting 15 to 20 hours into making a full playthrough. So it's varied, and I will admit I don't always cover every single game that I get, but I also get a lot of games that I don't necessarily ask for, and it is an interesting position to put myself in. And again, I think I want to be as open as possible with the way I deal with the games I get and the way I deal with the money that I get, not only through Patreon, but through reselling these games. It was honestly a super fun experience. I know I'm talking about it a lot, but I just spent 2.5 hours talking about the games in front of me, talking about games in general, comparing, contrasting, and I really enjoyed selling the games, like verbally selling the games, talking about what's good about the games and why you might like it. That was a cool surprise. I didn't expect getting to come from the flea market, and the cafe is planning on doing them more in the future. I think it's a really cool experience, not only for me, but for the people who came in. They got pretty good deals. They got to get a bunch of games that would otherwise have been just sitting on my shelf not being played, and from a bunch of other people. So I think that's all I want to say about that. It was a great event, and I'm looking forward to going to more of them. Let's now jump into the question and answer section, but before I answer anything, I want to thank everybody who gave me feedback last month when I asked for constructive criticism in the variety vlog. A whole bunch of people commented on the video, many people sent me direct emails with a whole bunch of positive things to say, as well as quite a few things that people might want to be added into the overall channel in general. I haven't made any specific changes yet, but I do appreciate all of that feedback, and I am keeping everything that people are saying in mind for the future. If enough people ask for a specific thing, I'm going to give it even more weight and potentially make those changes. So let's go ahead and jump into the questions now. I also didn't have any questions last month, and this month I have 6 of them to cover. 4 of them come from the same person. That's Hua Chen. Thank you for sending these over. And the first question is the only one of the 6 that does not actually pertain to board games, so feel free to skip ahead if you are not interested in this. But what his question is, what do you do for a living? What sort of education did you have? And how did you get to where you are today? I'll try not to go too long on here, and I can say that I have a BA in economics from college, and I have never done anything with it. I started college as a biology major because I thought biology was super fascinating and interesting in high school, but what I realized when I got to college is that all these classes are graded on a curve, and everybody in the biology classes were pre-med students. They wanted to go to medical school. They were at the beginning of their collegiate, their schooling, really. They were looking down the pipe for like 8 more years of school, and I wanted to get out in 4. I honestly hated school. I pretty much always hated school. I don't work very well in a classroom setting. I don't learn very well. Certainly not from reading the textbooks, and just I listen pretty well from the lecturers, but taking notes always was terrible to me. So I jumped out of that major. I did economics because it was the only way that got me out of college in 4 years, and unfortunately, I've done nothing with it because I don't actually care about economics in the slightest. I had a boring desk job for 2 years out of college where I was selling semiconductor robots, which is kind of cool, but mostly not. And I was pretty bored with my life. I wasn't sure where I was going, and I ended up connecting with somebody I did high school theater lighting with. I enjoyed doing theater in high school, specifically setting up all the lights and being a technician for the shows. And one of the people who I met way back when was now doing parties. They were setting up lights and audio systems and video systems for birthday parties, for weddings, for corporate events, for that kind of thing. And I started working for him part-time. And after about 6 months, I quit my day job and I started doing that full-time. I took a massive pay cut, I think $15,000 a year less, to do this new job, but it really helped my quality of life because I like working with my hands. I like going to new places. I like variety, and I also like the variable schedule. This was back in 2008, so I've been full-time for 8-ish years now. Technically December 21st of 2007. Anyway, that's minutia. What it means is I've been doing this for actually close to 9 years, and I really enjoy doing this. I've changed companies since then, and the company I've been with now for 7 years does really high-level, amazing stuff for the San Francisco Bay Area. There is a ton of money out here, and it means that I have done some spectacularly lavish events for the 0.001% of the planet. Like, these are the incredibly rich. I did a 8-week install once for a single day wedding. I've done multiple 4-week installs for weddings or birthday parties. And these things look amazing. They are very fun to be a part of. They can also be incredibly hard work. Like, the hours I work can be astonishing. At one point in 2012, August of 2012, I worked 184 hours in a 2-week period. So I was exhausted after that, obviously, and that's part of the reason why my video frequency can fluctuate. Because in January, nobody really gets married and there aren't that many parties. People are a bit partied out after the holiday season that I'm currently in right now in December. So I oftentimes get 2 to 4 to 5 days off a week, and that means I'm hoping to get a whole bunch of videos out then. However, in May and August, and specifically May and September and October, I oftentimes get 1 to 3 days off for the entire month. I've had Septembers where I did not take a single day off. And I make a ton of money. Those paychecks are excellent. I've subsequently gotten many raises and I'm very happy with my financial situation. But it also means that those are the months where my frequency of videos coming out dips in a really big way, especially right now. The first 2 weeks of December are crazy because every single company in San Francisco, all these startups, they're all doing holiday parties. So I'm working pretty much every day. I do happen to have this day off. It's a Wednesday. And that is also pretty good for the channel because it means I have somewhat unlimited unpaid vacation. I get 0 paid vacation, but it means that in 2011, I took 5 weeks off in a row in order to travel around New Zealand, and I came back and I had a job, which was excellent. And it also means that next year in 2017, I'm hoping to take 4 separate weeks off for all these conventions I want to go to, and I can just do that. I just give a bunch of notice. I say I'm not going to be in the country or in the state for these specific time frames, and I don't get scheduled to work then. And you know, I might get guilt tripped occasionally if it's a super busy time, but it's an option for me. It's a very cool thing and it means that I can potentially take a little bit less work at my day job, and well, actually, it's usually a night job, but and then I can focus more of that time on the channel, which is a really good situation to be in as a hobbyist doing this kind of part-time job, because I do spend between 10 and 20 hours a week working on this channel. That's the way I can do this. I'm not just, you know, working a 9 to 5 and then coming home and then making these videos. I sometimes have like 2 or 3 days off in the middle of the week, and that's how I can dedicate a bunch of time to making these videos. So anyway, I think that about wraps up where I am right now, my job and all that stuff. It works, it's very conducive for my life. It's the hours can be a bit insane. Like, I've worked an 18-hour week, 18-hour day last week, and a couple 16s and a 14, like a lot of very long days, but I make a lot of overtime and double time, and that really does help make up for it. So I think that about wraps up that question. Huachen's second question is, your reviews seem to follow a standard good, neutral, bad, player count, replay, etc. style format. Have you ever considered adding or taking away sections? Yes, I have. And in fact, my original reviews, if you go back, look nothing like my current reviews. The very first one that I did was structured in such a way that I covered the things I liked and the things I didn't like so much. But that was pretty much it. It was just good, bad, end of the review. And then I started doing good, neutral, bad, because I wanted to talk about things I found interesting about the board game, but that I didn't think were necessarily bad, but also not good. So the neutral thing kind of appeared. And then I started doing a conclusion because my review started to get relatively long, and I wanted to have the option for somebody to just watch the conclusion in the review, like just get a 2-minute snapshot for what I feel about a game, instead of having to watch the whole 13-minute section where I go into the nitty-gritty about the game. Not everybody cares about those tiny little things. They just want to see a broad strokes thing. So I threw in the conclusion, and then I don't know, about a year into making my reviews, I was reading Reddit, and somebody made a post on the board game subreddit saying, why doesn't anybody talk about the replayability and variability of board games in their reviews? Nobody does this. And so I said, I can do that. So I added that into my reviews, and it stuck there because I think that that is something that is worth talking about. And I think I saw somebody complaining about lack of player count discussion, and I think that that is an interesting thing that you can talk about a board game. Some games are terrible at certain player counts and great at other ones. And if you only play games at 2-player and this game is bad at 2 players, but the most amazing thing ever at 4, well, it's still probably not going to be the right game for you, and you want to know that going into the review. And many reviewers do cover those kind of things tangentially. They kind of get to it, but I like having it structured so that you can specifically see what you want there. Now, I have been requested a couple times in the past to add a randomness section to the reviews, like specifically cover what the random situation is, you know, like with the card draw luck or rolling the die, like how random is this game? And I've thought about it, but I haven't added it in there mostly because I really do feel like that's just going to make the reviews even longer. And in general, I try to cover the random aspects to a game if it is a positive, neutral, or a negative. You know, if that I feel like card draw luck is too powerful, then it's probably going to be a negative point in the review. And to a certain degree, I could also make the variability / replayability section a good, neutral, bad, because it is good or bad usually. Like there's definitely a sliding scale there, but I felt like people wanted to know that one enough, and it's in there, so I don't think I'm necessarily going to be ripping it out anytime soon. So yeah, I've thought about it, but at this point, I feel somewhat happy to be locked into my current structure for the reviews. Question number 3 is, if you ran through a whole game and also reviewed it, which video would take longer to make? This one is relatively simple to answer, and that's because the playthroughs will take longer. On average, my reviews take between an hour and a half and 2.5 hours to fully record the raw of me teaching the game and then also giving my opinion in front of the camera. However, with the playthroughs, I've had some be only an hour and a half of raw, and I've had several be 8 hours long. And also, once you have 8 hours of recorded video, I mean, that's a full workday for most people, then you have to edit that. And I don't watch all 8 hours. I do go through and I cut out all of the air gaps, but it usually takes about an hour just to cut out all of the air gaps and flubs throughout that video, and then I'm left with, you know, usually a 1.5 to 3 hour long video that I then edit down all the way until it's finally the 1 hour to an hour and 40 minute long final product. So that whole process can sometimes take like 16, 17 hours. So it's a pretty big difference with you have an average of about 2 hours for the reviews and probably an average of something around 13 to 14 hours for the playthroughs, again, depending on how big the game is that I'm actually playing through. And now for the 4th and final question from Hua Chen, he says, I have lately read lots of comparisons of Through the Ages, Clash of Cultures, and Sid Meier's Civ. What do you think of these 3, and can you relate them to the video game experiences? Well, right off the bat, I can say I never really played any video game Civilization games, so I can't really compare them there. But I have played Through the Ages, Clash of Cultures, and Sid Meier's Civ. And right off the bat, Through the Ages is the only one that does not have a map, and I think that's part of the reason why it is by far my favorite of the 3. I don't personally get much enjoyment from moving figurines around a map, trying to be in the right position at the right time, try to get there before everybody else does. That does not do very much for me in general from all board games, and I really like that Through the Ages distills the Civ experience down to lots of engine building and building things up. You do have a military might thing in Through the Ages, and it's very important to pay attention to the military strengths of your opponents, but I like that you don't have to worry, is your unit on the board one space out of position? I own Sid Meier's Civ. I haven't played it in a while. I played it a few times many years ago, back when it came out, and I definitely enjoyed it, but my issues with it is that many of the decisions for the game feel very front-loaded. I felt like the first 5 turns were way more important than the last 5 turns because it's really important to get new cities founded on this map. Again, you have the figurines on the map and you are founding new cities, and where that city goes in particular is super important based on the how far away it is from your first city, based on the different resources that are around that city. And so when I played the game, I found the first few turns I was just AP like crazy, trying to figure out exactly where I'm going to move my little settler to so that I don't find myself one spot out of position. I have enjoyed that game. There is quite a bit of randomness with the military cards. I actually bought the Warfare and Wisdom and Warfare expansion. It's still in Shrink. I've never busted that out because I just haven't gotten around to it because I don't really play these super long games that much anymore. But I heard that expansion fixes the randomness of the military situation. So, and lastly, I have Clash of Cultures. I don't have a lot to say about this because I'm not even sure if we finished the game. We played for like 2.5 hours. It was a 3-player game, and it just did not work at all for me. Something happened about 2 hours into the game that put me all the way back to the Stone Age with my positioning on the board. I went all the way back to pretty much just having the first thing that I had at the very beginning of the game. I was so far behind. I wasn't enjoying it in the slightest. Part of that might have been that specific play and how the game was taught, but it did not wow me in any way, and so I don't really see myself going back to it, even though I know some people just love Clash of Cultures. That first experience was so poor for me that I don't know why I would want to necessarily invest more time into it when I feel like I would much rather just crack open the Shrink on that expansion for Sid Meier's Civ and give that one a shot. But in general, my wheelhouse is going to be Through the Ages. I just don't like maps in these games. Question number 5 comes from Barry Strong, and he asks, what do you think of inserts and organizers, and do you use them? What is the best one you have found, and should game manufacturers do better on their game inserts, and how might they improve them? I don't have a ton to say about this. I've never actually went out of my way to purchase an insert for any of my games, so I can't speak to who makes the best inserts because they are expensive. You know, oftentimes an insert is going to be 30 to 50% the cost of the actual board game itself, and I'm a bit cult of the new. There are few games that get played over and over often enough that the setup time is that much of an issue, and just having little baggies in a box is that much of a pain for me to spend that money and get the organizer. I think I would be interested to try some of these custom organizers, but not interested enough to actually go out and purchase them. I think in general, I am okay with Ziploc bags in the box. I usually throw out the insert that comes with the game. Occasionally there's an insert that's really quite good that makes everything sit really nicely in the box, and I will keep it then. But for the most part, I'm not a fanatic about inserts. I don't really care about just having a big jumbled mess of sandwich bags and just pulling out the stuff and dumping them out on the table. It's not a really big deal for me, and I know it is for a bunch of people, but I can't really give a definitive, strong opinion on this one. And lastly, at question number 6, we have Mark Johnson, who asks, what is your typical size of your game group? What do you feel is the optimal size for a game group? So my game group is pretty large if you were to count everybody that I in general play with from one specific game setting to another. Like probably 20 to 30 people that I actively enjoy playing board games with. But the way it works, we have many different types of board game nights. Like sometimes I will just invite 2 or 3 people over to my house and we'll play a specific game I might want to play, and that is great. I mean, I think it's somewhat well known that 4 is the best player count for almost every board game. 5 is the worst. Having 5 people show up is so terrible because, I mean, I guess you can do a 3-player game and a 2-player game, but usually people don't want to do that, and most games don't play well at 5. So I think that, so yeah, and I'd say my core group of friends that I play games with the most often is probably around 12. And I think that's actually a pretty good number because you're going to have a reasonable amount of people show up to game nights based on that. Because, you know, people are going to work, people have special things going on, and occasionally 12 people show up and, you know, you'll play 3 4-player games or a couple 3s and a 4 and maybe even a 2. I think that ideal is probably around there. I like the situation that we have, but it is a bit fuzzy, right? The edges of this board game group are not very clearly defined because there are some people I play games with almost every week, and there are some people I play games with once every 3 months. It just depends on the setting, like specifically to the games that are played here, or maybe the organized groups that are played at Victory Point Cafe in Berkeley, and then also organized groups that happen elsewhere at other people's houses here in the East Bay and also in San Francisco occasionally. So I hope that kind of answers your question, although it was not a very definitive one. Let's now jump into the games of note section, and as I mentioned previously, these are just the games that I played in November outside of BoardGame.con. If you're interested in seeing my impressions of the 25 games I played at the convention, you can do so by clicking the little button up there and watching those videos instead. Unlike the past, I've decided to actually rank these games that I played throughout the month in order from the one I like the most to the one I like the least, so without further ado, let's go ahead and start. The first game is Mechs vs. Minions, and I have to admit that I was not privy to the hype on this game. When it was first announced, it seemed like everybody was just losing their bananas about how amazing this game was. All of these videos came out just praising it like crazy, and I just sat there thinking, it can't be that good. It doesn't actually look that great. And I didn't buy a copy of it, but a friend of mine did, and I'm really glad he did because he brought it to a game day at the beginning of the month, and we ended up playing the first mission of the campaign and the second one, and I really liked it. It was super fun. I was in the middle of playing it, and I was like, okay, I get it. All those people, they weren't wrong. The hype was real on this one. This is a really fun game. It's a cooperative experience where you are trying to move around the map and kill all these minions that are just slowly marching in different directions trying to mess up whatever your current goal is or objective. And every single person has one of these little mechs that they're wandering around, and it has a programming style movement, and that's part of the reason I wasn't initially interested because programming doesn't do much. But what nobody seemed to convey to me adequately is that it's a programming engine building game, because on every single turn you are taking cards and you're putting them into this line of cards that is the programming style where you evaluate the first one and the second one and then all the way down. But that card stays there, and on the next turn you take a new card and you add that in to this line. So every single turn you are fleshing out this program that you're constantly working on, whereas most programming games, you run the program once, you dump the cards, and then you make a new program. with the card ordering that you have in front of you. So I really enjoyed tweaking and building the engine that you had in front of you, and then I also really enjoyed the chaos that ensued, because whenever you take damage from these minions on the board, you don't just like lose a life point. Instead, you take a damage card, and it usually does things like overwrite one of the pieces to your program. And it doesn't necessarily do something bad. In fact, sometimes it does something good, but it might turn you, or it might push you in one specific direction that you were not planning on going. So you had this really nice engine going, and now suddenly it turns you to the right every single turn, and you need to do something about that. You need to, on the next turn, either try to get rid of that piece of damage, which there are a couple ways to do that, or maybe modify your program to work with the fact that you are now turning right at that point in the line. And it has this really cool charge up mechanism where when you put a card down on the line, it'll do something. And if you put another card on top of it that has the same symbol, then the new card is going to do something even better. You don't get the ability of the first thing, but you can kind of charge up to these really powerful abilities, and it's fun. You just kind of wandering around the board. Sometimes crazy kooky things are happening. You're wiping out tons of minions like crazy. Once you've killed enough, you can unlock certain abilities that you can do even more things. And I only played the first two missions of this campaign. I'm not sure how many there are. I think maybe like 8 or 9, something like that. And I am looking forward to playing this one again. It was a super fun time. Hopefully I'll have more opportunities to play it. I would play these missions again, although I am interested to see the better, more interesting things that come out as you unlock future missions. I think that the second mission was much more interesting than the first one. The first definitely felt like getting your feet wet for the whole system, but it was very easy. Whereas the second one, we won by the skin of our teeth with a big asterisk because we missed one rule, and we kind of went back and realized that we had a 25% chance that it wouldn't have mattered. We forgot to roll a die when we were supposed to, and like that die had a 25% chance of doing the right thing. So we sort of won, but you know, every game has an asterisk, and especially chaotic, crazy games with all sorts of rules all over the place like this one. Not necessarily rules, but lots of little things that happen as you are just evaluating all of the things in your program are going to cause some issues like this. So to wrap it up, it was a super fun game. I'm looking forward to playing it more. It definitely lived up to the hype for me. Game number 2 is Royal Goods / Oh My Goods with the Longsdale and Revolt expansion. Also with the new modified rule set. If you are not familiar with my review for the game, which I put out about a year ago, I was pretty disappointed in it. I wanted to love it. I really liked certain aspects of the game, but it did not come together very well. However, a month or two after I put out that review for the game, the designer, Alexander Fisher, put out a modified rule set, which is now actually the official rule set. In subsequent printings, they changed the rules. And those changes are huge. They did very big things towards helping me enjoy the game more, and this expansion added some really great things to make the game even better. And unfortunately, I'm pretty sure the expansion is sold out, so I'm about to tell you how great the expansion is, and you probably won't have access to it, but maybe this will help incentivize people to actually get this thing reprinted so more people can play with it. So the really big change that came in with the new rule set, and not necessarily the new expansion, is that in this multi-use card engine building game, you can now ditch your entire hand at the beginning of every turn and then draw up new cards. And what this means is you are going to be way more likely to find the specific pieces of the engine that you want in order to click them together and make all these gears work. A big problem I had with the original game, it was the card draw luck. It just felt like you might accidentally draw the perfect cards to make this really cool engine in front of you, or you might not. The other big issue that I had with the game was that it seemed like it ended before you got to use a potentially big, engine-y, cool, synergizing thing in front of you, and that was really unfortunate because that's the big cool thing. You want to build an engine and then use it. So the other major change to the rule set, not necessarily the expansion, was that at the end of the game, you run all of your engine-y pieces once. Without restrictions, you get to see your whole supply chain. You get to see your charcoal and your bricks turn into this thing and use this thing to turn into that thing, and now you have meat or something like that, or you might end up with, you know, glass windows. There's a whole bunch of different chains that you could do while you're playing the game, and the rule set was amazing. So the modified rules really helped Oh My Goods. I think if you own the game, you should absolutely play with those rules. But the expansion also added, I think, 5 or 6 new buildings to the deck, which is great. I think that having some more life in there is good, but they also were conditional buildings, which I think is fascinating, where they would, their goods on those specific buildings would have a variable amount of worth based on the other types of buildings, like colors of buildings that you had out in front of you, which I think is just really great. The expansion also comes with a 6-game campaign, which I have not dug into yet. I would really like to, because that sounds fascinating. Like, it's supposed to tell a little bit of a story of the Longsdale and Revolt. and that's a lot more than you would expect for the first expansion for this little card game, is to have a campaign expansion. But when I played it, it was just the standalone version of the expansion. You don't necessarily have to play with the campaign. It's great that both of those things are in there, and I think that this game is now amazing. It is able to get over the ravine that it before crashed into with the rule set modifications. It's now super excellent. I am looking forward to playing it more, and I'm definitely looking forward to playing it more with the expansion, but I can heartily recommend playing this game now with that new rule set. Next up, we have Plague Inc., which is a Kickstarter game that I backed a whole bunch of months ago, and it finally showed up. And this game is the board game version of a highly popular iOS game where you were in control of a disease and you were trying to modify it, mutate it in such a way as to have all sorts of terrible conditions so that it would be super lethal, but you don't want to be so lethal that you don't actually spread fast enough. So you want to increase your infection while also killing people off, and you want to do that fast enough so that the world does not come up with vaccines in order to stop your growth. You win the game, I guess, if you wipe out every human on the planet. It's a very dark theme, but it was a fun game. I enjoyed the iOS version. And the board game came out. It's a multiplayer experience. It's competitive, so everybody is playing a specific disease, trying to collectively wipe out everybody on the world. And it kind of felt thematically like inverse Pandemic, like if everybody took on the role of one of the disease cubes colors in Pandemic, but that's kind of where the similarity ended. And I enjoyed the play of this. We played it at 5 players, which I'll say right off the bat, don't play 5 players. It's not worth it for the downtime that existed. I think 4 players is probably going to work out pretty well. I'm looking forward to trying it 3 because that's probably going to be the best. Because what you're doing is you are mutating on your turn. You get new abilities that might increase your infection rate, which means you can put more cubes out on the board. It might also increase your lethality, which makes it more likely for you to kill off entire countries. And that is one of the main ways you're going to get victory points in the game, is those countries come into your area and you will score victory points based on maybe the size of the country, if it's a really big one, or if you have the majority of countries killed off in specific continental regions on the board. So what you're doing on every turn is just fun. You are gaining DNA points, which are victory points. Then you spend those victory points in order to mutate yourself. Then you spread out onto the board in various ways based on your mutations, because at the beginning you can only spread to other countries that are in your specific continental region. But maybe you were able to mutate into being airborne, and now you can travel from one airport location into another continent where there's a country that has an airport in it as well, and spread out from that spot over there. So just some really cool decisions to be made. I just, again, thought the downtime was a bit much with 5 players. I think that was probably a stretch goal that was thrown into the game. I would certainly not advise playing it. That's just way too many people. But the experience itself was fun. It was neat spending the victory points in order to actually get these abilities down. For the most part, you actually get those victory points back at the end of the game unless you modify yourself too many times, and then there's a bit of a cost there. And it did not have an area majority vibe to it, which is good because it kind of felt like it might at first when you're putting these cubes out on the board. Had an interesting tension of trying to have the most cubes in a specific country, because that does get you more DNA points, and you can spend those points in order to get mutations. So there's a little bit of majority there, but it was not that big of a deal. However, I can say from a thematic perspective, this game was highly thematic, but also somewhat chaotic in its randomness, because when you try to kill off countries, you actually roll a d6. And depending on how lethal you are, you're going to be more likely to kill off that country, but you might be really lethal and still miss. And if somebody else has an equal amount of control in that country as you, then they might roll the die, and they might only kill it on a 1, but if they roll a 1, then they get that country. So you're more likely to get the good stuff if you are investing towards it, but you can still get unlucky there. And there are also all these event cards that you gain if you are present in a country that gets killed, and these vary from good stuff for you to quite take that against your opponents. Like, you play the card down and just remove a bunch of cubes off of the board, but then, you know, you do it back at that person, and it goes back and forth like crazy. In the game that we played, I found myself having a hard time getting into countries that were getting killed off. So I probably, for most of the game, I found myself very event starved. At the very end of the game, all of the countries get killed off for the most part. And so I found myself with lots and lots of events, and I didn't get to use them very well. I came dead last, and I feel like I deserved it. I don't think I played the game terribly well. There were some things I could have done, but there were also some die rolls that could have gone in my favor that maybe should have gone in my favor. Like 50-50 die rolls seem to go against me more often than 50-50 in that specific play, but that's not necessarily the reason I did so poorly. I feel like the person who won did so because they played the game very well. There's a lot of different stuff going on here. I think that if you're playing with a smaller player count, the randomness is going to be a much less big of a deal. Like, I like the randomness. It's a thematic connection. Like, you're not necessarily going to kill it off, but if you're very lethal, you're more than likely to. Those event cards really pull you into the theme of all the crazy stuff that's going on, and it means that the board doesn't stagnate. But for us, it was like a 2-hour game, and that was longer than I wanted. I want it to be more of like a 60-minute experience, which it probably will be with repeated plays and just a lower player count. Game number 4 is Voyages of Marco Polo, and this was the second play of the game that I've done. I played it when I first got it like a year and a half ago. I'm not actually sure if I covered it on the channel at that point in time, but I think enough time has gone by that I want to talk about it specifically to talk about this one play. It was a 3-player game of it, and if you're not familiar with this game, it is a medium to slightly heavy Euro-style game where you are rolling dice as workers, so there's a bit of randomness there, and there's worker placement out on the board. But the big selling point for the game is that everybody has a incredibly asymmetric player power or setup versus everybody else around the board. So one of the big things that you're doing is trying to move your little person across the map. I think you start off somewhere in the western part of the Middle East, and you can work your way all the way over to China, you know, kind of mimicking the voyages and travels of Marco Polo. And so one person in the group played a trader, and every time anybody went to this big market and took resources, and you need resources, you're going to go there a lot, this person got a bit of those resources as well. From the bank. They didn't steal it from the person, but it meant they were just constantly getting free resources, which is awesome. Another player had just an extra die that they played with throughout the whole game. So they had extra actions there, and they also got these bonus contracts every single turn, which is just one less action that you need to do. So it's like they got a free action and then a bonus action on every single time that every turn of the game. And I think it's a 5-round game, so that's pretty important. And then for me, I took a role which I thought was going to be super interesting because it lets you teleport across the map. So you don't have to go one at a time. You can go from any neutral oasis spot to any other neutral oasis spot. And I thought this would be super cool, kind of scattering all over the place. And it ended up being very frustrating, actually. It was surprisingly slow to move around because you have to be in a neutral spot. So you have to move to a neutral spot, and then from a neutral spot to another neutral spot, and then from that neutral spot into maybe the city you want to go. So if I wanted to go anywhere, I had to move 3 movement, and that's very expensive. First of all, just in activating the movement, for the most part, you're not going to be able to move more than once on a turn, and there are 5 turns in the game. There are a couple things you can do, specific dice you can pull in order to finagle things to actually move twice in a turn, but that's expensive. And then just moving in general costs a ton of money, and then the actual locations on the map will oftentimes force you to spend various other resources when you travel to those spots. So we're playing the game. I was having a pretty good time with it, a little bit frustrated while I was playing it, and then we got to the 5th round. And the first thing I did was I moved my person to a spot. It was pretty lucrative. I got a bunch of points for going there. And then it came back to me again for my next turn, and I think there are 5 or 6 dice that you're playing with in each round, so I had a bunch more actions I was potentially going to do, and I locked down because I could not think of a single thing that would get me points. I can't remember the exact situation, but I had all these dice in front of me that I'd rolled. If I'd rolled them slightly differently, I would have had more options, and I did not have the resources to re-roll them necessarily enough to make my options better. And I actually asked my opponents, I said, can either of you guys see anything good for me to do? And they sat there, and I sat there for like 5+ minutes, and we kind of all ended up being like, yeah, you're kind of stuck. Like, the spot I was in, if I wanted to move anywhere, was incredibly expensive to move out of based off of the costs on the board. I had these contracts, but I already had the resources I needed to fulfill them, so it's not like I needed to go ahead and chase after that. And I think I ended up just doing a couple things that would help me. You know, I think the last 3 or 4 turns of the game netted me maybe a point or 2 in endgame divisors of, like 1 point for every 5 of this. And that was pretty frustrating. And I will admit that I put myself in that position, but the game also let me put myself in that position. And I did not necessarily like it that much. I'm not sure how this game is going to fare with my collection after that play, because I like a lot of the things that are going on here, and I really enjoy the idea of incredibly highly asymmetric player powers. But after 2 plays, it's hard to say that they are strictly balanced. It feels like some of them were definitely better than others. I feel like I had one of the more challenging ones. And also, finding yourself in frustrating situations like that maybe makes it slightly less worth it than I want it to be. And at its heart, it's a worker placement game, which is not that revolutionary of a mechanic to really keep me coming back to it. So I might play this game again. I might also never play this game again. I'm not really sure how I land with it. We'll see how the future holds. Game number 5 is Secret Hitler, which a friend of mine backed on Kickstarter, and he's been trying to get it played for a few months now, and we finally sat down and played 2 back-to-back 6-player games of it. And this game is a social deduction style in the line of the Resistance and Werewolf Mafia, that kind of thing, where there are hidden roles. You shuffle them up and you pass them out to everyone around the table, and then you need to try to get through the game. And there are essentially traitors. In this game, those are the fascists, and then there are the regular people. In this game, those are liberals. The liberals win if they're able to pass 5 out of the 6 liberal agendas in this deck, and the fascists win if they are able to, forget exactly, if they're able to get a certain number of fascist agendas happen, or if Hitler, who is hidden, gets elected as the chancellor, which is one of the mechanics of the game. So when you pass out the fascist cards, some of them are just fascist, and a single one is going to be specifically Hitler. So that's important to know who that is, and it's also important from my perspective for me not to be a fascist or Hitler, because that is the most stressful thing. I don't enjoy lying in games at all. I mostly played the game because everybody else wanted to, and I was kind of curious to see how it changed the resistance style dynamic. And I will admit that from an impartial perspective, based on, unbiased perspective, it's definitely not impartial, based off my biases of disliking this kind of games, I like the tweaks that it puts into the genre, because when you are playing the game, unlike the Resistance where you are picking like 2, 3, or maybe even 4 people to try and go on a mission, and then everybody puts the cards in and we flip them up to see if the mission gets borked, in this one it's always the person who is postulating who's going to be on the mission and one other person, no matter how many other people there are. So that simplifies that part, and it also makes the negotiation phase go faster, because you're not trying to pick a whole bunch of people. It's just you plus one other person, and then everybody votes. And if you go ahead, if the votes go positive, unlike in the Resistance where everybody can, say that the thing fails or succeeds, in this one, the person who put out the vote, they're the president, they draw 3 of these little agendas, and all 3 of them could be fascist. And in fact, there are way more fascist cards, I think almost twice as many, in the deck as liberal cards, so it's very possible. And that person is going to discard one of those 3, and then pass the 2 to the chancellor, who is the person that they postulated they wanted to be elected with them for this political party. And the chancellor picks one of those 2. So if you draw 3 and you discard 1 fascism, and there are 2 other fascism ones, you give it to the chancellor, they don't have a choice. They discard 1 and they play 1, and then suddenly you have you guys are fascists. And you could say, well, no, I didn't have a choice. I only had the 3, and I like that addition to the game style versus the Resistance, where you always have the choice if you want to make a mission happen or not. So that is a good addition to this style, but I will admit the most stressful part of this game was when I peeked at the card, because I was so desperately not wanting to be Hitler or a fascist, because I just hate lying. And both of the games, I was a liberal, much to my pleasure. And we played the game, and it was fine, and the liberals won both times. And the first game was actually very easy for the liberals, and the second game went a little bit closer, but the liberals ended up winning it. And I enjoyed winning it, but the happiest part of the whole game, the whole process, was revealing the card and seeing that I didn't have to lie throughout the game. So I don't think I'm going to want to play this one again. I think if it's the one game that everybody wants to play, I might give it a shot, and I'll desperately hope that I don't pull one of those fascist cards, because that is just not fun for me. But also the game was only like 30 minutes long, so it's not a terrible, it's not like I'm going to be playing a game I don't want to be playing for that long. So I recommend it if you're into lying to your friends. And now the 6th and final game is Mage Wars Academy, which I got as a freebie from BoardGame.con. It's just one of the door prize things that you can get when you register. And this is the kind of more streamlined, lightweight version of Mage Wars Arena that came out, I think, 2-ish years ago. And the idea of this game is fascinating. I was actually very excited to give it a play. And in the Mage Wars Academy box that I had, there are 2 different roles that you could play. So it's only a 2-player experience. And it's essentially as if you were playing Magic the Gathering, but your deck was your hand. So you always had your entire deck available to you. You literally have a spell book that you can flip through and pull cards out in order to play them. And then also, instead of having it be just simple addition and subtraction math when you do combat, you actually roll dice in Mage Wars in order to see how much damage a specific creature does versus somebody else. And then beyond that, the similarities are very strong to Magic. And I loved Magic. Man, I was crazy about it, pretty much obsessed with it for a couple of years in high school. Had thousands of cards and played it every single lunch break in high school. And I was interested to see how this went. Like that idea of having your entire deck available to you at all times on one hand seems very overwhelming, and that's why I was happy to be playing this Academy version instead of the Arena version, because there's a lot less going on, so there's less to be overwhelmed by. That being said, when I played it, the first turn was still like 10 minutes before either of us did anything, as we kind of flipped through every single page of our spell book, reading all of the different spells we had and trying to figure out what we wanted to do. And for the most part, I enjoyed that part of the game, but the game really fell flat for two big reasons. The first reason is that the style of decks that were in the game, one is a kind of a hunter person, and another one is a wizard. And I guess a beastmaster, technically. And the beastmaster style is kind of mid-range aggro style of deck, where you are putting out things that do lots of damage against your opponent. You're kind of just trying to just wear them down somewhat quickly, but it's not necessarily crazy burst. But the wizard is, if you're familiar with Magic at all, it kind of felt like a blue deck. It was very much countering the things that the other side did. So I played as the Beastmaster, and I was putting down these really cool creatures and trying to attack with them, and my opponent just seemed like they constantly had the correct response to it. They'd play a card down that would essentially make that creature disappear for 3 or 4 turns. They'd play a card down that would make that creature weaker. They'd play a card that says, no, you can't do that. They had all these no, no, no style cards against me, and that's just not fun. When I played Magic way back when, I refused to play against blue decks, just as a general rule, because I really don't like that style of play of having all these cool options and trying to do fun things and having my opponent say, nope, no fun for you. And that's the way it was. It was not that fun because I was constantly being stymied at every single step of the way. I ended up losing. It ended up going like way over an hour. It definitely overstayed its welcome. And I think part of that is because the wizard roll, all it did was slow me down, and it was also relatively slow in doing damage back. So I feel like that was a mistake for them in making this Mage Wars Academy set. I feel like they should have put not that wizard in there. There should have been like maybe 2 mid-range aggro style decks, so that you are just doing cool stuff and attacking your opponent and just attritioning each other down, and not necessarily stopping them from doing the fun, really cool combo. Because you get a couple really cool enchantments on that creature, and then they just say, no, that creature doesn't exist for 3 turns. That really sucks, especially considering the other issue I have with the game is that you can only summon one thing a turn for the most part. Technically, you can summon 2 things because you have this quick cast ability, and all of my creatures, some of my creatures might have been quick cast. Actually, no, I don't think any of them were. Either way, you could do at most 2 of these spells down on one of your turns. And I found that if you fell behind, it was really hard to get back in. Versus Magic, like you could do as much stuff as you can afford to on your turn. But in this one, it was only your mage, which is the character that you can actually attack with. You can have them attack, or you can have them cast spells. And then again, there's a little quick cast for another spell you can potentially play if it's a quick style spell. And that just wasn't enough. I felt very stymied by that. I did not enjoy being slowed down artificially like that throughout the game, and it felt like once I got behind, there was no way to get ahead, and my opponent was so slow in actually killing me, it went on way too long for both of us. Yeah, so they really should not have put this anti-fun super control deck in the box, and I feel like you should be able to cast way more things and do more stuff on your turn than the game allowed me to. So I ended up actually selling this game at the flea market. I only got the 1 play in. I'm not interested in playing it again. I'm glad I got to play it, so I have an idea of how the overall system works, but yeah, it was not good enough for me. It's now time for us to cover the shifting shelf, and this is where I show you all the new games that I have acquired throughout the last month, and then all the games that have been pulled off of my shelf. And this is a very long list for both of them, and the big reason for that is because of the flea market. I knew that I'm going to be getting a bunch of games coming in, so I took a very hard eye to my collection in general and pulled a bunch out. And as you can see, there are some holes in my collection now because I pulled so many games out, anticipating the rush of games that were coming in. Of actually, I mean, as you can see, a very big list. I've already filled in lots of holes. There were many more holes about a day ago before I reorganized everything. And I think this is good. You want to keep your collection fresh. At least I certainly want to, because I enjoy playing new games a lot. And then also, I like to cover new games for the channel, and I sometimes get free copies of relatively new games, and I bought almost all of these games that you see that got added into my shelf, so I spent a bunch of money on that, but I was able to buy those with the funds that I got through Patreon again. So that's super cool that that is keeping the collection fresh, and it's also giving me lots of different options of things that I can cover, especially once work slows down again in a couple weeks. I'm hoping to get playthroughs filmed for many of the games that I acquired over this last month. That's a very high priority for me. So if you have any questions about why I maybe took any of the specific games off, or about some of the games I was able to purchase, feel free to comment below, and I definitely will respond to all of those. And yeah, it's been been a really big month, and I think December might end up adding quite a few new games to the collection as well. And with that, we've reached the end of this vlog. I hope you've enjoyed it. This has been a somewhat exhausting stretch of filming for me because over the course of 3 days filming, I've covered 31 different games that I have played over this last month. And, it's fun doing these initial impressions, but it's also a little bit exhausting, just reaching in, what are my opinions and how does this game work? It's a little bit more tiring, honestly, mentally, than doing the playthroughs and doing the reviews. So I'm looking forward to not filming any reviews for the next 4 weeks until I cover December. But I will say that I'm planning on doing a special vlog at the end of the year or right at the beginning of the year to cover the entirety of 2016, specifically as it relates to the channel and how it's grown and how things have changed and how things might change going into the future. So I look forward to filming that. I hope you look forward to seeing it, and I hope you have a great December coming up, and hopefully you, just like me, will acquire quite a few games for Christmas. So I'd love to thank everybody who has been supporting this channel through Patreon. You can see a whole bunch of producer level pledges here. Many of them are new, and if you too would like to directly support this channel, you can do so at patreon.com/JonGetsGames. Also, if you'd like to see more vlogs like these that I do, as well as the full game playthroughs and the in-depth board game reviews, please subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching.